It's only 10:30 in the morning. You haven't done anything physically demanding. You haven't run a marathon. You haven't spent hours lifting heavy boxes. In fact, you've barely left your chair. Yet somehow, you already feel exhausted. Not the kind of exhaustion that makes your muscles ache. A different kind. The kind where opening another email feels overwhelming. The kind where even deciding what to eat for lunch feels like work. The kind where you stare at your to-do list, read the same sentence 3 times, and somehow absorb none of it. You tell yourself you just need a vacation, maybe more sleep, maybe another coffee, maybe a weekend with no responsibilities. Sometimes those things help, but only for a while. Then Monday arrives, and somehow you're right back where you started. Always tired, always mentally drained, always wondering how you're already exhausted before the day has even really begun. Most people think they know the answer. I'm just working too much. It sounds obvious. After all, work makes people tired. Problem solved. Except, there are people working 12-hour shifts who still have the energy to laugh with friends after dinner. There are parents chasing toddlers all day who somehow still find the mental space to enjoy reading before bed. And then there are people who spend most of the day sitting quietly behind a computer, yet feel completely depleted by sunset. If exhaustion were simply about how much you do, none of that should happen. So maybe we're asking the wrong question. Maybe mental exhaustion isn't about how much work your brain is doing. Maybe it's about what your brain refuses to stop doing. That sounds strange. Because your brain never really stops working. Even while you're asleep, billions of neurons continue exchanging signals. So why would one kind of thinking leave you energized, while another leaves you feeling like your mind has been carrying invisible weights all day? To answer that question, imagine walking into a room where 50 people are talking at the same time. At first, it's just noise. But then someone says your name. Instantly, your attention shifts. Without trying, without deciding. Your brain has been filtering thousands of sounds in the background, constantly deciding what deserves your attention and what doesn't. Now imagine doing something similar, not with voices, but with thoughts. Before you've even finished breakfast, your mind has already started juggling unfinished emails. A bill you forgot to pay, that conversation from yesterday, the meeting this afternoon, whether you should start exercising again, whether your parents are okay, whether you replied to that message, whether you should finally organize your finances. None of these thoughts stay for very long. They appear, disappear, then quietly return a few minutes later. You barely notice them anymore, because they've become part of the background, almost like dozens of computer programs running silently behind the screen. And that's where the first illusion begins. Most people assume mental exhaustion comes from the thoughts they're aware of, the presentation, the difficult project, the important decision. But those aren't usually what drain you the most. It's everything your brain keeps running in the background without ever reaching a conclusion. Here's the first plot twist. Your brain doesn't become exhausted because it's thinking. It becomes exhausted because it's constantly keeping track. Keeping track of promises. Keeping track of unfinished decisions. Keeping track of conversations that still need a response. Keeping track of goals you've postponed. Keeping track of possibilities you haven't ruled out. Every unfinished commitment quietly occupies a small piece of your attention. Individually, each one feels insignificant. Collectively, they become incredibly expensive. Imagine opening one tab on your laptop. No problem. Open 5 more. Still fine. Now open 50. The computer still works, just slower. Not because any single tab is demanding, because every tab is asking the system to remain ready. Your brain works in a surprisingly similar way. Psychologists have long observed that unfinished tasks tend to remain mentally active far longer than completed ones. Even when you're not consciously thinking about them, they continue pulling at your attention, quietly reminding your brain, "Don't forget me. We're not done yet." You'll need this later. Your brain doesn't know whether that unfinished task will matter in 5 minutes, or 5 months. So instead of closing the file, it leaves it open, just in case. Now imagine doing that hundreds of times. A half-finished project, an unanswered message, a decision you've been avoiding, a goal you keep promising to start next week, a difficult conversation you've rehearsed but never had. None of them seem heavy on their own, but together, they're like carrying hundreds of invisible backpacks. And here's the strange part. You rarely notice the weight while you're carrying it. You only notice that you're tired, which leads to an even bigger mystery. If these invisible mental open tabs are constantly draining your energy, why doesn't your brain simply close them? Why doesn't your brain simply close those mental tabs? Because from your brain's perspective, an unfinished thought isn't just unfinished, it's potentially important. Imagine you're hiking through a forest. Just before sunset, you hear a strange sound in the bushes. You don't investigate. You keep walking. Technically, nothing happened. But your brain doesn't file that moment away as completed. Instead, it quietly labels it possible threat. Keep monitoring. Thousands of years ago, that was an extraordinary survival advantage. Ignoring unfinished information could be fatal. Remembering it could keep you alive. That ancient system still exists today. Only the unfinished problems you're carrying rarely involve predators. Instead, they're things like, should I quit my job? Did I choose the right career? What if I disappoint everyone? I really need to call my parents. I should start exercising. I still haven't answered that email. None of these thoughts demand immediate action, but none of them receive closure either, so your brain keeps returning to them. Not because it enjoys bothering you, because unfinished information has always been more valuable than forgotten information. Psychologists have observed this phenomenon for nearly a century. It's commonly known as the Zeigarnik effect. People naturally remember unfinished tasks better than completed ones. Not because unfinished tasks are objectively more important, because your brain assumes they might still require action. In other words, your mind isn't trying to annoy you. It's trying not to lose track of something it believes could matter. That sounds helpful. Until modern life enters the picture. 100 years ago, your ancestors might have carried a handful of unfinished concerns at any given time. Today, before lunch, you've already collected dozens unread notifications. 3 unfinished conversations, 5 browser tabs, a work deadline, a package that's supposed to arrive, a subscription you forgot to cancel, a news headline you never finished reading, a podcast you paused halfway through, an online course you promised yourself you'd complete. Every one of them asks your brain to keep a tiny reminder alive. Individually, the cost is almost invisible. Together, they become a constant background demand on your attention, and that's where the second plot twist appears. The biggest source of mental exhaustion isn't intense concentration, it's constant switching. Think about what your day actually looks like. You're writing an email, a notification appears, you check your phone. While checking your phone, you remember a bill. You open your banking app. Halfway through, a coworker sends a message. You answer, then you return to the email. Except now, you need a few moments just to remember what you were thinking before the interruption. This happens dozens, sometimes hundreds, of times every day. It feels normal because modern technology has trained us to expect interruptions. But your brain experiences something very different. Every time you switch tasks, part of your attention remains attached to the previous one. Cognitive psychologists refer to this as attention residue. Your mind doesn't instantly reset. A small portion of your mental resources keeps lingering on whatever you just left behind. Imagine trying to read a book while someone quietly whispers yesterday's conversation in one ear, tomorrow's meeting in the other, and your grocery list somewhere in the background. You could probably still read, just not very well. That's essentially what attention residue feels like. Your attention becomes fragmented, not because you're incapable of focusing, because part of your brain is still somewhere else. This also explains something that confuses many people. Have you ever spent an entire day feeling busy, only to realize you accomplished almost nothing? It's easy to blame laziness, but laziness isn't usually the problem. Your brain may have been working incredibly hard, just not on one thing. It was constantly closing one loop, opening another, predicting the next interruption, trying to remember what it had forgotten, managing dozens of invisible transitions. Ironically, transitions often consume more mental energy than the work itself. But perhaps the biggest surprise is this. Mental exhaustion isn't simply about how many thoughts you have. It's about how many decisions your brain has to make. Every decision, even tiny ones, requires your brain to compare possibilities. Should I answer this message now or later? Should I cook or order food? Should I keep reading or check my notifications? Should I finish this project or start another? Most of these choices seem insignificant, but together they quietly drain the systems responsible for self-control, planning, and attention. By evening, you don't necessarily lack motivation. You lack available mental bandwidth, which is why even deciding what to watch on Netflix can suddenly feel strangely overwhelming. And yet, none of this explains one final mystery. Some people have just as many responsibilities, just as many decisions, just as many unfinished tasks, yet they don't seem permanently exhausted. What are they doing differently? The answer isn't that they have stronger brains. It's that they've learned something your brain desperately wants, a way to convince it that the search is finally over. The answer isn't that they have fewer responsibilities, and it certainly isn't that they never feel stressed. The difference is much more subtle. Some people have learned, often without realizing it, how to give their brains something every prediction machine desperately craves: closure. Not perfect closure, not complete certainty, just enough evidence to stop searching. Think about the last time you lost your phone. For 10 frantic minutes, your mind couldn't think about anything else. You checked your pockets, your bag, the kitchen table, the bathroom. You mentally replayed every step you had taken. Your attention narrowed until one question consumed everything else. Where is my phone? Then you found it. Nothing magical happened. You didn't become a different person, but in an instant, your mind relaxed. The search ended. The mental resources keeping that problem alive were suddenly free again. Your brain does this every single day. Every completed task, every finished conversation, every decision you finally make, every promise you either keep or consciously let go, each one sends the same quiet signal. You can stop monitoring this now. That's why crossing something off a to-do list often feels disproportionately satisfying. It's not just productivity, it's neurological relief. Your brain finally receives permission to close an open loop. But here's where many people accidentally sabotage themselves. They mistake collecting options for making progress. They keep researching, keep comparing, keep preparing, keep refining. Every new possibility feels productive. In reality, each new possibility often creates another open tab. Imagine standing in a grocery store trying to choose a cereal. There are 20 different boxes. You compare ingredients, sugar content, price. Reviews. 5 minutes later, you're still standing there. Not because choosing cereal is difficult, because every new option creates another decision your brain feels obligated to evaluate. Now expand that to careers, relationships, cities to live in, business ideas, life goals. Modern life offers more choices than any previous generation has ever faced. Choice is a privilege, but it also carries a hidden cost. Every unresolved possibility quietly competes for your attention. Which brings us to the final plot twist. You are probably not exhausted because you're doing too much. You're exhausted because your brain is trying to keep too many futures alive at the same time. One version of you wants to change careers. Another wants to start a business. Another wants to travel. Another wants to save money. Another wants to learn a language. Another wants to get healthier. Another wants to spend more time with family. Another wants to become someone completely different. None of these futures are wrong, but your brain cannot fully commit to all of them simultaneously. Every path you refuse to close remains another simulation running quietly in the background. Another prediction. Another plan. Another invisible demand on your attention. This is why simplifying your life often feels strangely energizing. Not because life becomes easier, because your brain has fewer realities to simulate, fewer decisions to postpone, fewer unfinished stories asking for attention. And perhaps that's the most misunderstood part of mental exhaustion. People often believe they need more motivation, more discipline, more productivity hacks. But sometimes, the most productive thing you can do is finish something, send the email, delete the draft you'll never use, make the phone call, cross one task off the list, say no to an opportunity you know you won't pursue. Choose. Not because every choice is perfect, but because every completed choice frees your mind to focus on the present instead of protecting every possible future. Now think back to the beginning of this video. It was only 10:30 in the morning. You hadn't done anything physically demanding, yet you already felt exhausted. Maybe your brain wasn't tired from thinking. Maybe it was tired from carrying unfinished conversations, unmade decisions, unanswered questions, half-built plans, invisible responsibilities that never seemed heavy on their own until they all accumulated. Your mind is remarkably powerful, but like any powerful system, it has limits. Not because it isn't intelligent enough, because attention is finite. Every open loop asks for a little of it. Every unresolved decision borrows a little more. Eventually, the cost becomes invisible. You don't notice the hundreds of background processes. You only notice that you're tired. The good news is that your brain doesn't need a perfectly organized life to recover. It simply needs evidence that not every problem must remain active, that some doors can be closed, some decisions can stand, some questions can remain unanswered. Because peace of mind isn't created by eliminating every responsibility. It's created by no longer asking your brain to carry every possibility at once. Maybe that's what mental energy really is. Not having fewer things to do, but having fewer things still running in the background. And perhaps tonight, before you look for another productivity system or another cup of coffee, ask yourself one simple question. What mental tab have I been leaving open for far too long? Because the fastest way to feel mentally lighter isn't always adding something new. Sometimes, it's finally allowing your brain to close the tabs it has been holding open all along.